I mean, the beauty with the CMS company is that there's like no shortage of feedback from customers. Like you can look at that as a good thing or a bad thing. You know, some days it's a tough thing. Some days it's a great thing. So now, like you said, there's a lot of Headless CMSes out there. People ask me like, why did you start a CMS? You know, and I'm like, I don't know, actually. It's kind of insane from a business perspective because it's like CMS is like not a new thing, but it really was just kind of born out of like personal pains.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to Jamstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss modern web development with maintainers, founders, and developers. Jamstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at Jamstack Radio. Welcome to that installment of Jamstack Radio. On the line, we got Jake Lumetta from ButterCMS. Jake, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. Big fan of the pod.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you listen. I had mentioned I've known of ButterCMS for a while, but before we jump in, you just want to share real quickly who's Jake and like what's your background? How'd you get into this?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the founder and CEO of Butter. I guess ButterCMS, formerly. My background's software engineering. Prior to Butter, I was the CTO at energy kind of startup. I've been doing startups kind of my whole life. Have started and failed a bunch of them. Too many to count at this point, to be honest. But yeah, big fan of startups, and have just been always dabbling in side projects and such, and eventually came across something that seems to be working pretty well with Butter. Excellent.
So what is Butter?
Yeah, so Butter is, I guess, technically a headless CMS. Although when I founded it, I thought of it as an API, and still do think of it as an API-first CMS. Butter was really kind of born out of pains that I experienced when I was leading engineering at some previous startups that I mentioned. So basically, we were building an energy marketplace we were using Django at the time, Python and Django. So this was pre-Jamstack days, I suppose. But yeah, we were building kind of a custom marketplace and everything was going great. And then, then the CMO asked, hey, Jake, we need to be able to write blog posts. I was like, cool. Let's use this WordPress thing I've heard of. Like, everyone uses WordPress. I've heard of it. Let's just kind of plug it in to be our blog. The thing is that we wanted it to be, and this is a little bit of a technical detail, but we wanted it to be, isite.com/blog. We didn't want to just throw it on the subdomain because that's not optimal for SEO. So in order to achieve kind of oursite.com/blog, to really deeply kind of integrate WordPress into our own kind of native tech stack, again, we were just using Django at the time, ended up being a really, really, really kind of painful process, insightfully painful process, actually. So it was like, wow, just kind of looking back at that, I'll spare all the gory details of what that took and the pains and challenges there. But just sort of looking back, fast forward 2 months or so of trying to get that set up, I was like, man, that was exceptionally expensive, painful, complex, just to like add a blog to our existing, site.
Yeah.
And so that was really kind of the genesis of Butter, where it was like, how should, as an engineer, like how should a modern CMS work? Like how would I want it to work, basically, was really just kind of the thought process. And that led me down to kind of thinking about some core design philosophies. I mean, like this is such early days. I mean, Headless CMS is well known now, but when I founded Butter, I had never heard of a Headless CMS. I'm not sure the term, it may have existed somewhere out there, but I had certainly never heard of it. And I wasn't aware of any other companies doing things like this. But, some kind of the first principles of like, how should a modern CMS work that I was thinking through when kind of founding Butter. The first is that it should be able to work with any technology stack. Like that was kind of a core goal. And so that really led me down the path of like, well, it needs to be API based. So like, WordPress is great. It works, but you have to be proficient with PHP and know PHP. And so if you're not using PHP, that kind of stinks. And so it's like, well, not just a bash on WordPress, but like a lot of CMSs kind of work that way. It's like, why should it matter what the CMS is built in, whether or not you can use it or not? You know what I mean? Like how the CMS is built should not like determine whether or not you should be able to use it. At least that's what, that was my opinion. So with Butter, that's what took me down the API based approach. It's like, okay, well, this has to be API based so it can be integrated into any technology stack. And then the other big thing was having it be SaaS based. So we are SaaS only. And the thing there was like, just from having to run and maintain the WordPress instance that we set up, it was like, setting up the WordPress site, the database, patching it, securing it, scaling it, making it performant. All that kind of stuff just kind of sucks. Like for CMS, like that's not what I considered as a part of the core part of my day job. It was just like a byproduct of needing a CMS. You know what I mean? It's like I had to do all this extra stuff on top of like, my actual important kind of core day job, which was like building this energy marketplace in my personal case. So that's why with Butter, we took the approach of being SaaS based. So we handle that for you. So it's a bit odd because I decided to take that pain on and make it a personal pain of mine for the past almost decade of my life. But, we take that pain on so that other folks don't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
Okay. So you mentioned you had to make this API based because you had that conviction. So what do you mean by API based CMS?
API based or API first rather. So like I think of Butter in two pieces. Like one is, the dashboard, obviously where you go log into Butter, you do your stuff, create blog posts, landing pages, that kind of thing. But then the other big part of it is just the API. And so we've always been built like from day one with an API component, like that is just a core part of Butter.
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned like about the term headless CMS because like I have a story there if you want to hear it because I
love it. Yeah.
Started actually talking about it. I'm like, we should just hit record. Previously, when I started this podcast, I worked at Netlify and we had seen these API-first CMSes like start to grow. There wasn't a ton of them, but it was like, hey, we can build front-end focused React apps and Angular apps and have a CMS attached to it. And then we can sort of compete directly against WordPress by just building a Jamstack in general. And so we had to like think about like, what is a term that could be applied to this. So I don't know if Headless CMS was specifically came out of Netlify in particular.
Okay.
But there was like a small movement of people who did have a bunch of names. And it's funny, I just ran into Bud Parr at GitHub University and Jamstack Conf yesterday. And like Bud Parr, he maintains the New Dynamic. He contributes and runs that stuff. New Dynamic was like one of the other terms of what Jamstack eventually became.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So like Headless CMS was an easier way to say, hey, do you have instead of saying, is it API first? Oh, headless. Okay. Headless is a term that was picking up.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. Like Butter was not a Headless CMS. It wasn't like day one, like I'm going to create the best Headless CMS ever. It was just like, like I said, just kind of how should a modern CMS work, in my opinion, and kind of over the first, few years or so, started stumbling across other CMSs that seem to be doing kind of similar things. And then, eventually saw this like Headless thing. And then people are like, are you a Headless CMS? And I'm like, yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it became just kind of this marketing sort of thing. So so now we're a Headless CMS.
Yeah, it's sort of like all the back and forth, the conversations like, can I use this thing? Can I not use it? Is it for me?
Right.
Like you can check a box pretty quickly by attaching a term and joining a movement, and which is what the whole Jamstack being so evolutionary.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really just to have a bunch of tools, projects that folks can put together to solve problems that are not sort of locked in. Like when you got to choose PHP if you want to do WordPress, or you've got to use, now WordPress does provide a headless version.
Yeah.
So I guess that leads to my question of like, how is Butter standing out from the rest?
Yeah. So now, like you said, there's a lot of Headless CMSs out there. But there's always been a lot of CMSs out there. That's the thing. It's like people ask me like, why did you start a CMS? And I'm like, I don't know, actually. It's kind of insane from a business perspective because it's like CMS is like not a new thing. They've existed for decades. But it really was just kind of born out of like personal pains. So, how does Butter stand out from the rest nowadays? First of all, who doesn't like butter, literally in the name, right? So that that helps.
Yeah, big fan.
One thing about the company is that we've not raised any outside funding, so we're completely, I guess the term is bootstrapped. I like to say we're customer funded, and customer focused. So I think that's pretty unique for CMS companies, just generally speaking. Like I know that we're definitely in the minority there, but I think it's a really great thing. And I've, kind of deliberately built the company in this way for lots of different reasons. But again, it really just allows us to be super customer focused and really just driving product. On the product side, we really have a pretty opinionated UI for certain kind of key things. So like we have formal concepts for blog posts, we have formal concepts for pages. We have another concept called collections. And basically, we really take like an opinionated approach to the UI, which ultimately means what we're trying to do there is have just an amazing experience for marketers and content teams so that it's just really, really intuitive and easy for them to do what they need to. Like sometimes there's a bit of a concern moving from a traditional CMS like WordPress or whatever to a Headless CMS just because the concepts are different and like how you kind of do what you need to do as far as navigating it and finding the piece of content you need to update and all this kind of stuff can be a little bit daunting. And so we really try to make that not an issue at all as far as our UI goes. We spend a lot of time focused on our API design as well. So the developer experience. So we have a huge focus on the marketer side, but on the developer experience side, again, my background being a software developer, I want us just to have an amazing developer experience. And so that manifests itself in lots of different ways. You know, what is a great developer experience? So we try and have really, really good docs. We try and have great docs for pretty much any tech stack out there. So I encourage you to go just take a look at our docs and whatever tech stack you're using, we probably have a guide for it. And then our API is really clean as far as just, you know, how you kind of work with it. So just the design of it as well as the response of the API. The data that comes back is pretty clean, really easy to work with. So that's a big focus for us as well. And then I guess one of the sort of maybe intangible things is we have one of the highest NPS scores in the industry, actually. So based on a industry survey. So that's something we're really, really proud of. I think we're like 93 is our NPS score. So again, it just goes back to kind of the first point around the company and being super customer focused.
Yeah, and you said that you're SaaS only. So like you're specifically folks can self-serve, add Butter to their toolkit. There's no sort of enterprise option or anything like that?
We have an enterprise option, but if by enterprise you mean like self-hosted where they can run the software like on-premise, we don't support on-premise, but we are definitely like kind of like enterprise. We do have like enterprise customers and such that they use us, but they need to use us in a SaaS way where they just kind of connect to our API.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how big's the team? Like, how do you maintain all these different interactions and different frameworks and libraries?
Yeah, it's a big effort. You know, we do kind of a mix of like in-house as well as working with, you know, a variety of like freelancers and such. So like when you see all those different technology stacks, it's not to say that we internally are kind of masters of all of them, but you know, we just have built up like a really nice network of folks who are basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to scale. And it sounds like, you know, bootstrapping, the term of not taking outside institutional funding, like you bootstrapped your way into building a business that, I don't know if you're profitable. It's a private company, so you don't have to disclose, but if it is, definitely disclose. But I guess what I'm getting at is, like, do you have like personal reasons for bootstrapping? Have you done VC-backed companies before?
Yeah, so Butter is profitable, which is really helpful, especially in times like this.
Yeah.
But why haven't I raised funding for Butter? Yeah, I mean, you know, the past two companies I worked at, they were both venture backed, and it was super exciting, and I loved working at those companies. But I kind of saw a lot of it was just my first experience, and gave me kind of a good insight into what that's like, basically. And you know, the model makes sense for certain types of businesses and for certain types of reasons, but in terms of just like building Butter and building my own business, the model just didn't really kind of align with, I don't know, maybe my core values or thought process or whatever it is. So specifically, I like the idea of just being able to focus on customers, you know, and not worried about raising the next round of funding, perhaps. You know, that was definitely, it's just inherently part of it, right? When you kind of go down that path, unless you can raise the first round and you're instantly profitable off that first round, which is quite rare, then that means you're sort of on this path of, you know, every 12 to 18 months, you're back out there pitching, you know, and you're pitching to investors and you're not focused on the customers and the product. And so I was like, well, if I can avoid that sounds good. So, you know, let's just kind of focus on customers and try and build this profitably. And then, yeah, I don't know, just the concept of like burning a lot of money every month is also really scary to me. It's like the term runway, you know, is kind of it's sort of a built-in term that's like, oh, you know, every company has runway, but it's like, that's not actually true. if you're a profitable company, you don't have, the term doesn't apply to you. You have infinite runway.
Yeah.
So like, in running Butter, we've been fortunate to not have to like think about the world in terms of months of runway left, basically.
Yeah.
So, those are the two big things. There's a lot of cons though that come to bootstrapping, that there's a lot of pros to raising money, right? That we've missed out on this, but anyways.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cause like I think that the VC back and the runway and applying that and like the burn rate, you're taking investment for the sort of the hope that you get growth really quickly. Mm-hmm. And if you don't get growth really quickly, then you shut your doors really quickly. So like that becomes option. But you mentioned in passing like 10 plus years of working on this problem, like you're able to see whatever the next tier of headless or whatever the next evolution when it comes to building apps and like be part of that longevity. And especially during this current market, like not having the stress of like, oh man, I don't know if we're going to be able to make the next round of funding because we're not profitable. Yeah. You do get to bypass that too as well. So it's definitely a decision. I think it's definitely admirable to grow a company for this long and like make it as successful as you've made it so far. So curious what's your outlook on the sort of space. So like this is Jamstack Radio. So I'm curious like how Butter fits as a piece of the jam, because I like butter and jam sandwiches. I'm a big fan.
Hey, I love it.
Yeah. So like what's next for Butter?
Yeah. I mean, we're continuing along, like we've just been building this company over many years, and we've been moving, I guess from a business perspective, just been moving up market is how the term goes. So you've just been continuing to reinvest in the platform, in the product, making it better and better. I mean, the beauty with the CMS company is that there's like no shortage of feedback from customers. Like, you can look at that as a good thing or a bad thing. Some days it's a tough thing. Some days it's a great thing, as far as just like to answer your question, like where should we go? Like customers have a lot of opinions around that. So listening to them is like definitely helps with kind of figuring that out. But yeah, I don't know. Just really want to keep your ears to the ground. I mean, there's so many new frameworks and such that are coming out every month. It feels like, Astro Remix, etc. Interesting things have been happening in the space around like new frameworks and companies kind of acquiring those and such. So I think that's kind of an interesting development.
Yeah, in particular the Remix and Shopify.
Yeah, Remix and Shopify. That was pretty recent.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting development. But I mean, with Butter, we always want to. I think we're well positioned just to kind of adapt and pay attention to where the market's going. I mean, on the bleeding edge, and I think a lot of the folks that listen to this, we're like on super bleeding edge stuff. Like you ask the average person, like, have they heard of Astro or Remix? Not that I'm picking on them, but it's just like, we're like on the very, very bleeding edge here. And then like the rest of the developer community and industry, they're still kind of catching up. I think even Headless CMS, is not as necessarily pervasive as we may think it is, even though like we're so deep in it, you know what I mean? And sometimes I go to a conference and it's like, I describe Headless CMS and they're kind of like, oh, what is that? That's a weird word. Like, tell me about that term. Like, what does that mean? And so whenever I have those moments, it's always really insightful. It's like, wow, like, yeah, we've been doing it for a while. Like we're so deep in it, but I think if you just look across the entire space, it's like still probably pretty early days here.
Yeah.
For a lot of this stuff. So.
Yeah, and I would say that you're pretty early days from the time frame you've given me doing the Headless CMS or API-first CMS as well. You're pretty early days as well, because like we didn't see WordPress have the WordPress API and publicly available and usable until maybe shortly after Butter was created.
Really? Okay. I actually don't know the date. That's actually a good question. I don't actually know the date of when WordPress came out with an API. Yeah. Yeah.
It's around the date that I had an episode with Get Shifter, and they specifically were leveraging WordPress as an API.
Oh, okay.
So that might've been around 2016, 2017.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's when folks really, it might've been around a little bit before then, but that would have been around when people were really like intrigued and started to sort of explore that space, because you saw Gatsby sort of grow and blossom on like being able to leverage the API into Gatsby and build an entire WordPress blog without the WordPress admin interface. So that is you would get the admin interface, but you didn't have to be locked down to PHP.
PHP, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a trend, and like WordPress is even doubling down, where now it's I think the number that on the Jamstack survey that was just announced on I believe Tuesday. 45%. Actually, it was from the Jamstack survey. This was actually another talk I was at. So Lori Voss, who runs the Jamstack survey at Netlify, shared that WordPress was 45% of the web in general, which is like an amazing, astounding number, because I know the last number, I think, was like 30 or 25%.
Yeah, it's amazing. It keeps going up. Yeah,
it keeps going up, and I think it's mainly because it's inertia. Like, it's a thing that so many agencies have built their bread and butter around. Like, no pun intended. But there's a lot of opportunity there, because like at the end of the day, like WordPress it's going to cost $75,000 to get a site up and running from an agency, and if I can do a SaaS model and have my scrappy developers add butter to it, there's an opportunity there to circumvent getting stuck into some. I don't. WordPress, it's a valuable and it's a very useful tool, but there's so much other like exciting stuff that's out there that you can build on top of. Which appreciate your longevity and just churning along. That pun was intended.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate the kind words, genuinely, and I echo your sentiment kind of on all fronts there for sure. Yeah, I mean, the CMS space, like I said earlier, is not new. And it's not small. So it's just kind of like, I don't think it's a winner take all. I think the fact that WordPress continues to grow, I mean, 45% is an amazing number. I wouldn't have been surprised to see that number start to go down, just, given how old it is, and I figured it would be pretty saturated, but the number keeps going up.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. It's like, I don't know, maybe, rising tide kind of floats all boats type of thing.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, it's not a zero-sum game, because I think what's really happening with WordPress is that they're bringing more people on the web.
Yeah.
So as you grow, the tide rises, you're growing, but they're positioned to basically attach themselves to the hose of new people adding sites on the web. Because I definitely have some WordPress sites I haven't touched in years, so that my site doesn't disappear because I don't touch it. I create new sites, and my new sites might be WordPress. They're not WordPress. Like, surprise. I'm using Jamstack stuff, but I build new sites all the time. Every weekend or every couple weekends, I'll build a new site for fun. So for that reason, I think that the web is expanding.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for folks to also be part of that sort of education pipeline, sort of onboarding folks onto web. And I would say, like, I've come across some content for Butter, and y'all show up in the SEO feed. So it's all about this, educating folks that there's another opportunity out there to get on the web, get your site live, to add a CMS to your site if you want to blog or you want to maintain some content. Like, that's all opportunity. But how do you get started with Butter? Like, what's the first step? How do people, if you've listened to this and you're like, I want to try something besides WordPress, like, what's the pitch there?
Yeah, go to buttercms.com. But if you want to jump deeper into it, go to buttercms.com/docs, DOCS. You'll see a beautiful kind of array of your favorite flavor of tech stacks, and just pick your favorite flavor there. And we probably have a starter project for it. One thing that we've done that's really cool is it's not just like a starter project sitting out there. Like, go take a look, and then we'll actually have like a deploy to Netlify button, or or Vercel or Heroku or whoever, right below the starter project. So literally you can just like go there, buttercms.com/docs, find your favorite tech stack, click the deploy button, and have a live project up and running in like literally under 5 minutes. And so what that project will be is it'll be kind of the starter project that has like the nice front end hosted on your favorite hosting company. And that will be connected to your own ButterCMS account, which will have some kind of default sort of content just built right into your account there. So it's like zero config, zero anything that you need to do. So that's a really fast way for you to get like a live site up and running, and you can go and customize it from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Jake, so much for the conversation. I do want to transition us to picks. So these are things that we're jamming on. Could be music, food, tech related. Nothing's off the radar for at least this podcast. And if you don't mind, I'll go first. And the thing I've been jamming on is something I've been working on since June of last year, called The Secret Sauce. It's a YouTube series that we just talk with open source maintainers and founders about their open source strategy. I've been working on open source full time for about 6 months. So as long as this other podcast has been around, I've been working on this new project, which is now live, opensauce.pizza. But yeah, Secret Sauce, just want to shout out Ryan Carinato, who is the maintainer of Solid.js. Had a great conversation with him about where Solid came from. He had been working on it for like 5-6 years.
Oh, wow.
But only folks had really kind of realized it in the last 18 months. And the reason for that is that he just started writing blog posts, started creating content about what he was working on, like started sharing his ideas and thoughts because he's a super like sharp dude. And I think it's a testament of like, you got to talk about what you're working on. Put it out there in the open. Otherwise, people won't know what you're doing. So, super fascinating story on his approach and how he got to where he's at today. He's working full time at Netlify, doing open source. So I appreciate everyone. Like and subscribe. Check out that video on the secret sauce. YouTube.com/open sauce is the place to find it. You'll find the playlist. But yeah, that's my pick.
Awesome. Definitely check it out. Love the name. I mean, yeah, especially food. Can't go wrong.
Yes.
So, my pick is just OpenAI. I'm not sure if it'll be new news to anyone listening to this podcast, but just, I mean, the stuff that they're putting out is crazy with DALL-E. I mean, everyone knows about GTP3 at this point, but yeah, it's been a while since I've had one of those like, wow, this is different kind of moments. And the stuff you see that DALL-E creates, it's like, I had that kind of feeling of seeing like some of the images that they generate and stuff. So there's a lot of emotions that go with it. It's like, this is really cool, but also really kind of crazy, maybe a little scary, like what are all the implications here? So I know there's a lot of conversations online about this stuff. I guess I'll throw another secondary pick called Life 3.0. It's a book. It's about kind of AI, and one of the chapters that it opens up with is like this story about this made up group of super smart kind of AI developers. And like, holy cow, and it just sort of makes up this whole story around how these developers take over the world, basically. And that chapter, I get like vibes of like that from OpenAI, not in a like bad way, but just like in a crazy, like, holy cow, like some of the stuff that this book sort of made up hypothetical is like happening. It's like happening right now, like where there's multi-billion-dollar companies built on top of OpenAI, you know what I mean? Which speaks, I think, to the power of OpenAI. I mean, like,
definitely look to check that out. I think it's a fascinating space.
Yeah.
AI in general. And I think a lot of the stuff, it's like the folks, everyone looks at like Star Trek as like the place that like gave us the iPhone or like GPS and stuff like that. And I think a lot of the sort of fiction that has come out in the last like 20 years is now fueling growth of or sort of progress of people like, you know what, actually that should exist in the world. And I think AI, like I saw, I mentioned this on the podcast before, but maybe someone missed it, but I met a founder who's working on generative AI for game programming. So when you think like NPCs, it's like, hey, I want an NPC that's eating pizza and drinking a beer, sitting on a stool, and it will generate that like as the game is processing and including stuff. So like to be able to see like new stuff happening in the game based on AI would be pretty amazing for expansive worlds and et cetera. So
it's kind of infinite at that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very expensive problem, to be quite honest. Like I was definitely talking about the cost of being able to do that as a test. But yeah, I think if you've got enough will and enough time to sort of test out these problems, and maybe if you do take funding, like maybe someone will fund it or someone will hire you to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the current state of development it's extremely exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we take it.
Yeah, likewise.
Cool. Well, speaking of which, thanks so much for the conversation, and hopefully everyone try out Butter. And if you're looking for a Headless CMS, definitely check it out.
Appreciate it, Brian.
And keep spreading the jam. That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter @Jamstack Radio. This show is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com.